The first time I realized Christmas could feel like a courtroom, I was sitting at my parents' dining room table in Naperville, Illinois, with my napkin folded neatly on my lap and my hands tucked under the edge of the table so nobody could see them shaking. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet in that soft Midwestern way, the kind of cold that makes the air look clean and sharp under porch lights. Inside, my parents' house was warm and bright and crowded, full of cinnamon and roasted garlic, and the layered voices of people who loved to talk over one another. Mom had gone all out, like she always did. A big ham glazed and shining, a casserole dish bubbling at the edges, rolls wrapped in a towel to keep them hot. The Christmas tree in the living room blinked through the doorway like it was trying to convince me everything was fine. I sat in my usual spot, the one I'd been sitting in since I was a kid, halfway down the table, close enough to the kitchen to be useful, far enough from the center to be forgettable. Across from me, my younger sister Lydia looked like a holiday catalog, hair curled, sweater perfect, cheeks flushed with excitement. She kept glancing toward the hallway like she was waiting for someone to call her name and announce she'd won something. Dad was at the head of the table, carving the ham like a man who believed the world still made sense if you did. Things in the right order. He was in a crisp button-down, sleeves rolled up just enough to look casual, and he had that satisfied look he got when family was gathered and everyone behaved. Mom floated between chairs, topping off drinks, touching shoulders, laughing too loud at jokes she'd heard 100 times. She was wearing lipstick that matched her nails, and every time she smiled, I could see how proud she was of the picture we made. If you are listening to this right now, I have to ask, what are you doing while you listen? Are you folding laundry? Driving home? Stirring something on the stove? For me, I was sitting at that table with my knees pressed together, trying to swallow a knot in my throat without anyone noticing. If you have ever felt invisible in a room full of your own family, go ahead and tap like and subscribe, and tell me where you are listening from, because I promise you, you are not alone in this. Dinner moved the way it always did, like a familiar song. Aunt Dawn talked about her church holiday fundraiser. Someone's husband told a story about traffic on Interstate 90 and how people forgot how to drive the minute it snowed. I nodded and smiled at the right moments, even laughed once or twice, but it felt like I was watching myself do it from a few feet away. My mind kept circling the same thought, the one I'd been trying to ignore since I pulled into my parents' driveway and noticed the garage door was shut tight. Lydia kept tapping her foot, a small, impatient bounce under the table. Every so often, she leaned toward Mom and whispered something, and Mom would swat her hand playfully, the way you do with a child who cannot wait for dessert. Dad watched them with soft eyes, like whatever secret they were sharing was something sweet he'd baked himself. Right when plates were mostly empty, and the room had that sleepy warmth that comes after a good meal, Dad stood up and lifted his glass. He didn't tap it with a spoon. He didn't need to. The room quieted because Dad expected it to. That was how it worked in our family. Dad spoke, and everyone listened. He cleared his throat, smiling like he was about to tell a joke. He looked down the table at Lydia, and the smile widened into something almost theatrical. He said he wanted to take a moment, because this year had been special. He said Lydia had been working so hard, that she had graduated, that she deserved something meaningful to mark the moment. Mom clasped her hands together and gave a little squeal, like she was just as surprised as everyone else. But I could see the practiced excitement in her face. Lydia put both hands over her mouth. Her eyes filled instantly. She didn't even try to hide it, because in our family, Lydia's feelings were always allowed to be big. Dad said there was something he wanted her to see, something that wasn't under the tree. Chairs scraped back. People laughed and murmured and grabbed sweaters. The whole room rose in a rush of anticipation, and I stood too, because that is what you do when the current of the family pulls you along. We moved through the hallway like a little parade, shoes thumping against the hard wood, breath turning visible for a second when the door opened and the cold air slapped our faces. The garage smelled like rubber and oil, and that faint, sweet chemical scent of something new. Dad flicked on the overhead lights, and for one beat, everything was still, like the air itself was holding its breath. There it was. A BMW X5, 2026. White paint so glossy it reflected the strings of garage lights like stars. An enormous red bow sat on the hood, bright as a stop sign, The ribbon stretched across the windshield like a ribbon on a gift box. Lydia made a sound that was half sob and half laugh, and then she was crying. Full body crying. The kind you do when you feel adored. She ran forward and pressed her hands to the door, as if she needed to touch it to prove it was real. Mom laughed, loud and delighted, her laughter echoing off the walls. She wrapped her arms around Lydia from behind, and Lydia leaned back into her like she belonged there. People clapped. Aunt Dawn said, "Oh my goodness." Someone whistled. Adam stood with his hands on his hips, soaking it all in like a man who had just pulled off the perfect magic trick. Dad said it again. Graduation gift. Because she had worked so hard, he said he wanted his little girl to have something she could be proud of. He did not say anything about how much it cost. He did not mention payments. He did not glance at me even once. I watched Lydia's fingers trace the curve of the side mirror, the way she tilted her head, imagining herself behind the wheel. She whispered that her friends all had new cars now. She said she had been dreaming about this, like it was a wish she'd made in secret for years. Dad smiled like he had rescued her from some tragedy. Mom kept laughing, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes, as if this was the most joyful thing that had ever happened in that garage. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. It was not anger yet. It was something quieter, like a door closing inside me. We went back inside, the cold chasing us into the warmth, and everyone was still buzzing as they settled into chairs again. Plates were cleared. Coffee appeared. Someone put on Christmas music low in the background, the kind that is supposed to make everything feel gentle and safe. Dad told Lydia to sit, because there was one more part of the evening. He said there were gifts. Mom directed everyone to the living room, but Dad insisted we finish at the table first, as if the dining room was where family decisions were made. Lydia sat practically vibrating. Aunt Dawn patted her hand and said she deserved it. Dad nodded in agreement. Then, with a flourish that made my stomach tighten, Mom slid a small gift bag across the table toward me. It was light. Too light. The paper was thin and crinkled, and the bag was something you could pick up at any drugstore. Lydia had a mountain of wrapped boxes waiting under the tree, and my bag looked like a last-minute afterthought. I told myself not to care. I told myself not to read into it. I told myself I was too old to be hurt by something as childish as Christmas. Gifts. And still, my fingers felt numb as I reached for the tissue paper. I pulled it out slowly. Inside was a pair of socks. White athletic socks, folded into a tight rectangle. They were not festive. They were not special. They were the kind you toss into a cart when you realize you are low on basics. The price tag was still attached. $2.49. I held them in my lap for a second, staring at that little tag like it was a mistake. Like, surely someone had meant to remove it. Like, surely it could not be intentional. Mom laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a soft giggle. She laughed like she had just watched something funny happen on television. Dad leaned back in his chair and looked at me with calm, measured eyes. The room had quieted again, not because anyone cared about my gift, but because they were watching my face, waiting to see what I would do, waiting for the responsible one to be responsible. Dad said family comes first. I didn't respond. I could feel my cheeks warming, not from embarrassment, but from the effort of keeping my expression neutral. Adam said, "Everyone gets what they deserve." Mom laughed again, and Lydia, still flushed from her BMW moment, let out a little burst of laughter too, like my discomfort was a side dish to her joy. Then Dad said, "Take it or get out." His voice was not raised. That was what made it worse. It wasn't a blow-up. It wasn't a fight. It was a verdict. I looked down at the socks again. $2.49. It was such a small number, but it landed like a weight. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. I could hear someone's spoon clink against a coffee mug. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I did not cry. I did not yell. I did not ask why. I smiled. It was the kind of smile women learn to make when they are trying to keep the peace. The kind of smile you use when you are swallowing something sharp. I said, "Thank you," because that is what a good daughter says at Christmas dinner. I said I could always use socks. I even lifted them slightly like they were a joke I could share, like I was in on it. Dad nodded, satisfied. Mom leaned back in her chair, still amused. Lydia's attention drifted away from me immediately, back to her phone, back to her new car, back to the part of the night that belonged to her. Conversation started again, as if nothing had happened. People stood and moved into the living room. Mom turned on more lights. Someone took pictures of Lydia by the tree, her cheeks wet with happy tears, her arms thrown around Mom and Dad. I followed them because my body knew the choreography. I stood off to the side while Lydia opened a few more gifts, and I clapped at the right times. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else. The room blurred at the edges, not because I was dizzy, but because something inside me was narrowing its focus. All I could see was that bow, that shiny white hood, that price tag on my socks. At some point, Dad walked past me and patted my shoulder. A firm little squeeze, like I was a well-trained dog. He told me I was always the strong one. He told me he knew I understood what family meant. I nodded, because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. When the night finally slowed down, when people started yawning and hugging and bundling up to leave, Mom hugged me and said goodnight. She told me to drive safely. She told me she was proud of me. She told me she loved me. I said I love you too, because old habits are hard to kill. Lydia barely looked up when I told her goodnight. She was still holding her key, turning them in her hand like she couldn't believe they were real. She said something about taking the BMW out first thing in the morning, maybe posting a video. She said she could not wait to show everyone. Dad locked the door behind the last guest. He checked the windows like he always did. Mom turned off the kitchen light. The house settled into its nighttime quiet, and I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the muffled sound of Lydia's laughter from upstairs. I walked into my childhood bedroom. The same pale wall, the same familiar creak in the floorboard by the dresser. The bedspread was holiday-themed, something Mom had put on to make it feel cozy. The lamp threw a warm circle of light on the nightstand. I sat on the edge of the bed with the socks still in my hand. $2.49. I thought about Dad's voice, calm and certain. Family comes first. Everyone gets what they deserve. Take it or get out. I realized he had already told me exactly where I stood, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to earn my way back into his approval. I didn't feel the urge to explain myself. I didn't feel the urge to fix it. I just felt tired. I set the socks on the nightstand like they were evidence. I turned off the lamp, and the darkness filled the room. Down the hall, I heard Mom's laughter again, softer now, as if she was reliving the moment. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house breathe. And I knew that when morning came, I was not going to be the person they expected me to be. That thought sat heavy in my chest as the house finally went quiet. The laughter down the hall faded. Doors closed softly. Pipes clicked as someone turned on water. Then there was nothing but the low hum of the furnace and the faint ticking of the clock in the hallway, the same clock that had counted down every Christmas of my childhood. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to my own breathing. I did not cry. I did not replay the scene at the table again and again like I usually would. Instead, my mind felt oddly still, like it had reached a conclusion long before my emotions had caught up. After a while, I sat up and reached for my phone. The screen lit the room in a pale blue glow. It was late, well past midnight, but sleep felt impossible. My body was tired, my eyes burned, yet my thoughts were sharp, focused in a way that surprised me. I opened my email, then closed it. I opened my banking app, then hesitated. For years, whenever something felt wrong with my family, I had talked myself out of looking too closely. I had told myself not to make waves, not to overthink, not to question. Tonight, that instinct was gone. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood up. The carpet was cold under my feet. I padded across the room to the desk Mom still called my study, even though it was really just an old piece of furniture from a clearance store and a chair that wobbled if you leaned back too far. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen came to life, and with it, the quiet reality of my life. Not memories, not emotions, just facts. I logged into my bank account first. The familiar list of transactions filled the screen, neat and orderly. Lines of responsibility stacked one on top of the other. I did not scroll far. I did not need to. The mortgage payment was there, scheduled, like it had been for years. Automatic, reliable. My name is attached to it, not Dad's. Mine. I clicked into the details. The amount. The date, the confirmation that it would process without anyone needing to lift a finger. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a second. Then I opened the insurance account. Auto insurance. The policy covered both of my parents' vehicles, my email, my phone number, my payment method, all of it tied back to me, like a web I had spun slowly, one helpful decision at a time. Utilities were next. Electric, gas, water, everything that kept the house warm and bright and comfortable during an Illinois winter. All on automatic payment. All managed through logins Dad never bothered to learn because he did not need. 2. Escrow followed. Property taxes bundled neatly into monthly payments. Out of sight, out of mind. Again, my name, my account, my responsibility. I sat there staring at the screen, the soft whir of the laptop fan the only sound in the room. This was the truth I had never allowed myself to say out loud. Not to my friends, not to my coworkers, not even to myself. Their life worked because I made it work. I thought about Dad standing in the garage, chest puffed out, basking in the applause as Lydia cried over her BMW. I thought about the way he had spoken. Confident, sure, like a man who believed he was in control. "Everything is fine," he always said. That had been his favorite phrase for as long as I could remember. Everything is fine, as long as the lights stay on. Everything is fine, as long as the bills are paid. Everything is fine, as long as someone else quietly handles the details. The decision to buy that car had not been practical. It had not been planned. It had been emotional, driven by pride and pressure and the desire to see Lydia happy, to give her what her friends had, to feel like a generous father. I could see that clearly now, without bitterness, without anger. What he had not done was think about what would happen next. I opened a new tab and logged into the payment portal. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected them to shake, to hesitate, to freeze the way they always did when family was involved. Instead, they moved with quiet certainty. I clicked on the mortgage payment. There was a small option beneath it, something I had never touched before. Cancel automatic payment. The words sat there, simple and unassuming. No warning banners, no dramatic pop-ups. Just a choice. I hovered the cursor over it and waited for guilt to surge, for panic, for the familiar voice in my head to start listing all the reasons this would be wrong. None of that came. I clicked. A confirmation window appeared, asking me to verify. I did. The screen refreshed, and the payment disappeared from the schedule. Canceled, effective immediately. I took a slow breath. Next was the auto insurance. The same process. The same clean, quiet finality. Canceled, effective immediately. Utilities followed, one by one. Each click felt less like an act of rebellion and more like setting something down after carrying it for too long. Escrow was last. I paused there for a moment, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Property taxes were not something you missed lightly. They were not something you forgot about. They were the kind of thing that came back around with consequences. I thought about Dad's voice at the table. Take it or get out. I clicked. Canceled. Effective immediately. When it was done, I sat back and stared at the screen. The list of scheduled payments was shorter now. Cleaner. Lighter. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel cruel. What I felt was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that comes after you finally stop holding your breath. I opened the printer settings and fed paper into the tray. The printer whirred to life, loud in the quiet room, spitting out page after page. Each one showed the same thing. Confirm of cancellation. My name, the date, the effective status. I stacked the papers neatly, aligning the edges the way I always did when I wanted to keep my emotions in. Check. Canceled, effective immediately. The words looked different on paper, more real, less reversible. I gathered the pages and set them aside on the desk. Then I stood up and stretched, my back aching, my shoulders tight. It occurred to me that this was the first Christmas Eve in years where I had not tried to fix anything. I had not sent an apologetic text. I had not smoothed over an uncomfortable moment. I had not made excuses for anyone. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. Snow dusted the sidewalks, untouched, glowing faintly under the streetlights. A car passed slowly, tires crunching, then disappeared around the corner. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed again. Lydia's laughter floated briefly through the house. light and carefree. I wondered if she was still holding her keys, if she was lying in bed, imagining herself driving that car, imagining how it would feel to pull up somewhere and be admired. I did not begrudge her the dream. What I begrudged was the cost. I returned to the desk and slid the printed pages into a folder. My movements were careful, deliberate, like I was preparing for a meeting rather than dismantling the financial backbone of my family. I glanced at the time in the corner of the screen. It was getting close to 4 a.m. That felt important. I shut down the laptop and stood there for a moment in the dim room, listening to the quiet. I was not angry. I was not even sad in the way I expected to be. I felt clear. This was not about punishment. It was about alignment, about finally matching my actions to the truth I had been living with for years. I sat back down on the bed and picked up the socks from the nightstand. The price tag was still there, bright and unapologetic. I turned them over in my hands, feeling the thin fabric, the ordinariness of them. Everyone gets what they deserve. The words echoed in my head, not as an insult anymore, but as a statement of fact. I set the socks down and stood up again, this time with purpose. There were a few things I still needed to do before morning, a few decisions left to make. The clock on the wall ticked steadily as the minutes passed, each second carrying me closer to 4 a.m. And I did not stop it. The clock clicked over to 4 a.m. without any ceremony. No chime, no warning, just a quiet change in numbers that somehow felt heavier than anything that had happened all night. I stood up, turned off the lamp, and reached for my suitcase. I had packed earlier, quietly, folding my clothes with care, not because I was sentimental about them, but because I wanted to move through this house one last time without chaos. The zipper sounded too loud in the stillness, and I paused, listening. No footsteps, no voices. Everyone was asleep. I lifted the suitcase and felt the familiar pull in my shoulder, the reminder that I had carried more than my share for a long time. Slowly, I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The house looked different at 4 a.m, stripped of noise, stripped of performance. Just walls and floors and furniture holding decades of memories that suddenly felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. I passed the framed photos on the wall. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, smiling faces, frozen in time. I did not stop to study them. I did not reach out to touch the frames. I kept walking. The stairs creaked softly under my weight. I paused halfway down, holding my breath, waiting for a light to turn on, for a voice to call my name. Nothing happened. The house stayed asleep. In the kitchen, the Christmas tree still glowed softly in the corner, lights blinking in a slow, lazy rhythm. Wrapped boxes sat underneath it, some already torn open, others untouched. The room smelled faintly of food and pine, and something sweet from Mom's. Candles. I set my suitcase down near the table and reached into my pocket. The house key felt heavier than it ever had before. I placed it carefully on the wooden surface, right where Dad always dropped his keys when he came home. I did not add my car keys. Those stayed in my coat pocket, where they belonged. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at that small piece of metal, know against what it meant. This was not dramatic. This was not symbolic in a way anyone would appreciate at first glance. It was practical. Final. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I had prepared. Inside were the printed confirmations, stacked neatly, the edges still crisp. Canceled, effective immediately. Mortgage. Auto insurance, utilities, everything that had quietly held this house together. I knelt down and slid the folder under the tree, placing it carefully among the wrapping paper and bows, positioning it so it would be impossible to miss. It was the only gift I left behind. I hesitated for just a second, then took out a small piece of paper and wrote one short line in my own handwriting. Nothing dramatic, nothing long. Family comes first. Everyone gets what they deserve. I folded the paper once and tucked it into the folder. That was it. No long note, no explanation, no apology. I had spent years explaining myself. Tonight, I let my actions speak instead. I did not wake Mom. I did not knock on Lydia's door. I did not look back toward Dad's office, where the light was always on late into the night, even when no work was being done. I pulled on my coat, slung my purse over my shoulder, and lifted the suitcase again. The weight felt different now, manageable, like it matched what I was carrying inside for the first time in a long while. At the front door, I paused with my hand on the knob. The house was completely silent, as if it were holding its breath. For a brief moment, a thought flickered through my mind. Not regret, not fear, just a quiet awareness that once I stepped outside, there would be no easy way back. No pretending this was a misunderstanding. No smoothing it over later. I opened the door and stepped into the cold. The air hit my face, sharp and clean, and I inhaled deeply. Snow crunched softly under my shoes as I walked down the front steps. The neighborhood was asleep. Lights off, cars lined up neatly along the street, the illusion of stability intact. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk of my car and closed it gently. The sound echoed louder than I expected in the quiet street. When I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, the dashboard lights flickered on, familiar and comforting. I adjusted the mirrors out of habit, my hands moving on autopilot, and then I pulled away from the curb. As I drove through the neighborhood, I noticed things I had never paid attention to before. The way the streetlights cast soft halos on the snow, the shape of the houses against the dark sky, the stillness. This was the same road I had driven down countless times, coming home for holidays, bringing gifts, bringing help, bringing myself back into a role I no longer fit. Tonight, it felt different. I turned onto the main road and watched the house disappear in my rearview mirror. I expected something dramatic to happen inside me, a rush of anger, a wave of grief. Relief so strong it took my breath away. Instead, what I felt was lighter than all of that. Not happiness, not triumph, just space. My phone buzzed once on the passenger seat. I did not look at it. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, the empty lanes stretching out in front of me. Naperville at 4 a.m. was quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. No traffic, no distractions, just me and the hum of the tires against the pavement. As the miles passed, a strange calm settled over me. My chest loosened. My shoulders dropped. For the first time in years, there was no list running through my head of things I needed to fix, manage, or prevent from falling apart. There was nothing left to do tonight. That realization brought a wave of something close to relief, but underneath it was emptiness. A hollow place where obligation used to live. It was unsettling, like stepping out of a crowded room into open air and realizing you had forgotten how to stand still. I drove on, letting the road carry me forward. I did not know what would happen when they woke up. I did not know how long it would take for them to understand what I had done, or if they ever truly would. I did not try to predict the fallout. For once, I allowed myself not to plan for everyone else's reaction. The sky was just beginning to lighten at the edges as I headed toward the highway, the dark blue slowly giving way to gray. Morning was coming, whether anyone was ready for it or not. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel and kept driving, carrying with me a mix of lightness and loss, freedom and uncertainty. The house behind me was quiet. The road ahead was empty, and for the first time in a very long time, both of those things felt exactly right. By the time I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment building, the sky had shifted from black to a thin winter gray, the kind that makes everything look honest and unfinished. My fingers were stiff from gripping the steering wheel, and my eyes felt scratchy, but I still did not feel sleepy. I felt awake in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. I carried my suitcase up the stairs, step by step, and the familiar smell of the hallway hit me. Old carpet and someone's laundry detergent. It was a small building, nothing fancy, but it was mine. When I unlocked my door and stepped inside, the quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. I set the suitcase down in the entryway and stood there for a second, listening. No laughter, no clinking dishes, no television in the background. Just silence and the soft click of the heater turning on. I took off my coat and hung it on the hook by the door. My keys landed in the bowl on the little table I kept by the entrance. It was a simple routine, and it made my chest loosen. Just a little. Then my phone buzzed. A sharp vibration against the wood of the table, like a tiny alarm going off in my life. I glanced at it and saw Mom's name on the screen. I did not answer. The buzzing stopped, and for a moment, there was peace again. Then it buzzed again. Same name, same insistence. I walked into the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and drank it slowly. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Not from panic, but from adrenaline that had not burned off yet. The phone buzzed again, and again, and again. I picked it up and looked at the missed calls stacking up. I did not feel flattered. I did not feel guilty. I felt something closer to curiosity, like I was observing a storm from inside a safe house. The first voicemail came through almost immediately. I let it go to voicemail, then played it back as I leaned against the counter. Mom's voice was high, breathy, the way it got when she was scared but trying to sound reasonable. She said my name like she was calling a child from across a crowded store. She asked where I was. She asked what I was doing. She said we found something under the tree. She said, call me back right now. No, how are you? No, you are safe. No, something happened. Just what are you doing? The next call came before the voicemail finished. Playing. This time it was Dad. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A new voicemail appeared. I played it. Dad's voice was controlled, but there was a hard edge underneath it. The same edge he used when he wanted to remind everyone who set the rules. He said I needed to pick up the phone. He said this was not funny. He said I was being dramatic. He said we can talk about this like adults. Like adults, he said, as if the night before had not been him telling me to take it or get out. My stomach tightened. Not from anger, but from that old reflex to prepare for his disappointment. I hated that reflex. I hated how quickly it still showed up. The phone buzzed again. Lydia, this time. I almost laughed. A short sound that died in my throat. Lydia did not call me early in the morning. Lydia barely called me at all, unless she needed a ride or advice or someone to calm Dad down. Her voicemail was a mess. Her voice sounded thick like she had been crying. She said, Emma, please, what is going on? She said Dad told me the car was my graduation gift. She said Mom is freaking out. She said Dad is yelling at everyone. She said you are ruining Christmas. Still, are you okay? No. Why would you be so hurt that you left at 4 a.m? Just you are ruining Christmas. I set the phone down and pressed my palms to the counter. The laminate was cold and smooth under my hands. I took a slow breath and let it out through my nose. This was the part I had been avoiding for years. Not the money, not the payments, the reaction. The way my family could twist any boundary into an attack, any no into betrayal. I walked into the living room and sat down on the edge of my couch. The room looked exactly the way I had left it when I went to Naperville. A throw blanket folded neatly. A stack of mail on the coffee table. A small plant on the windowsill that was doing its best to survive winter. This space had held me together for years while I went out into the world, pretending I was fine. It had been my quiet place, my recovery room, and I had still been carrying their weight even here. My phone buzzed again, and I watched it light up on the table. Another call from Mom. Another call from Dad. Another call from Lydia. I did not answer. I let the phone ring and ring until it stopped. Then I sat in the quiet again. And I waited. I knew what was happening on the other end. I could picture it with uncomfortable clarity. Mom in the kitchen, hair messy, robe pulled tight, standing in front of the tree with her hand over her mouth. Lydia pacing in circles, crying, shouting, then crying again. Dad in his slippers, jaw clenched, staring at paper like it had personally insulted him. Dad would not be reading carefully. He never did. He would scan for the part where he could assign blame. Mom would be searching for a way to make this about feelings instead of facts. Lydia would be looking for someone to fix it. And none of them would know how, because I had been the one who knew how for a long time. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. Mom's voice had shifted. Less fear, more accusation. She said I embarrassed her. She said we had guests. She said she could not believe I would do this on Christmas. She said, after everything we have done for you. After everything, she said. I sat back against the couch cushions and stared at the ceiling for a second, letting that phrase hang in the air. After everything we have done for you. It was always the same script, the same line, the same rewriting of history, where my contributions became invisible and theirs became the headline. The phone buzzed again. Dad, again. I listened to that voicemail too, because a part of me still needed to understand how his mind worked, even now. David's voice was sharper this time. He said, you need to stop this right now. He said you are overreacting. He said you are jealous. He said you are making everyone uncomfortable. He said the socks were a joke. He said you cannot take a joke. He said you have always been too sensitive. Too sensitive, he said, as if sensitivity was the problem, and not what he had done. I felt something flicker in me, a small spark that could have turned into rage. But it did not. It settled into something steady. He was not going to understand. Not because he could not, but because understanding would require him to admit he was wrong, and Dad did not do that. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the world was waking up. A neighbor scraped ice off a windshield. Someone walked a dog bundled in a coat. A car drove by slowly, tires hissing over salt and snow. Normal life. Regular people. Everyone handles their own responsibilities. My phone buzzed again, and I turned away from the window. This time, a text message popped up from Lydia. It was a long string of words without much punctuation, the way people write when they are panicking. It said, "Mom is crying. Dad is furious. They cannot log into anything. The mortgage site says the payment is canceled. The insurance account says the policy is canceled. The utility company put them on hold and asked for a password Dad does not know. She said he is yelling that you did this to punish us. She said, please pick up, Emma, please." I could almost hear her voice as I read it, the way it rises and falls when she is trying to sound like the victim even, when she does not understand the whole story. I set the phone down again and rubbed my forehead. They cannot log into anything. Dad does not know the password. The utility company asked for a password Dad does not know. Part of me felt a bitter satisfaction, and I did not like that part. I did not want to be someone who enjoyed watching people struggle. But another part of me, the part that had been ignored for years, felt validated. They did not even know what I had been doing. They had been living inside a system I built and maintained, and they had never bothered to learn how it worked. They had never bothered to ask if it was too heavy for me to carry. They had called me responsible, but they had never treated me with respect. My phone buzzed again. Mom again. I let it go. I walked into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, the same bed I had collapsed into so many nights after long days at work. I took off my shoes and rubbed my feet, trying to ground myself in my own body instead of the chaos happening miles away. The phone buzzed again. Dad again. Then another text from Mom. It said, pick up right now. It said, this is uncalled for. It said, you are hurting your father. It said, I do not know who you think you are. And then it said something that made my stomach drop. Not because it scared me, but because it showed me exactly how deep the entitlement went. It said, you have a good job. You can afford to help. Stop being selfish. Selfish. I read the word twice, letting it sink in. That was the story they were telling themselves in real time. Not that they had relied on me. Not that they had taken without asking. Not that they had laughed at me at the table and told me to get out. No, I was selfish. I stood up and walked back into the living room. My hands were steady again. I picked up my phone, held it in my palm, and felt the vibration of another incoming call. Dad. I watched it ring until it went quiet. I did not want to hear his voice. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The day outside kept moving. The light grew brighter. The morning drifted forward like it had every right to be peaceful, even while my family spiraled. The phone buzzed again, and the sound made my chest tighten. But it also reminded me of something important. For years, the buzzing had meant I had to respond. It meant I had to fix it. It had meant I had to sacrifice my own peace to keep theirs intact. Today, it meant something else. Today, it meant they were finally feeling what I had been holding for them. I looked at the phone, at the list of missed calls, the voicemails piling up, the frantic texts. I did not answer any of them. Instead, I pressed and held the power button until the screen went black. The silence that followed was immediate and complete, like a door closing. And in that quiet, I realized something that made my throat tighten. My silence was not just a boundary. It was a force. It was the first thing I had ever done that they could not talk their way around, guilt their way through, or laugh off at the dinner table, and it was scaring them. For a while after that morning, there was nothing. No calls, no messages. Just quiet days that settled into a new rhythm I was still learning how to live inside. I went back to work. I bought groceries without doing mental math in every aisle. I slept through the night without my phone lighting up on the nightstand. Week passed. The world did not end. My chest slowly unclenched. Then the first domino fell. I did not hear about it right away. Not from Mom. Not from Lydia. I heard about it from a number I almost did not recognize when it lit up my phone one afternoon while I was sitting at my desk. Dad. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my fingers hovering above it. This was the first time his name had appeared since Christmas morning. No voicemail build-up, no string of angry texts beforehand. Just a call. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. His voice sounded different immediately. Lower. Unsteady. Not angry, not commanding. Scared. He said my name softly, like he was testing it, like he was not sure if he was allowed to say it anymore. Then he took a breath and told me he had been in an accident. My stomach dropped, a sharp, cold feeling spreading through my chest. I asked if he was hurt. He said no, just a small collision. A fender bender at a stoplight. He said everyone walked away. He said the car was drivable. He said it was nothing serious, but the way his voice trembled told me it was not nothing. He went quiet for a second, then said there was a problem with the insurance. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. He explained it slowly, haltingly, like he was trying to piece it together as he spoke. He said when he called the insurance company to file a claim, they told him the policy was inactive. They said it had lapsed weeks ago. They said there was no coverage on the date of the accident. He said he told them that was impossible. He said he had never missed a payment. He said he demanded to speak to a supervisor. I could picture it clearly. David was standing in the kitchen or maybe the living room, phone pressed to his ear, voice rising with every sentence, convinced that authority alone could fix this. But authority does not pay premiums. He said they asked him to verify his account information. He said they asked for the email on file, the phone number, the login credentials. He did not have them. He admitted that quietly, like it embarrassed him to say it out loud. He said they told him the cancellation notice had been sent. He said he never saw it. He said he did not know where it went. I sat there listening, my heart beating slowly, steadily. I was not surprised. I had known this moment would come. I just did not know how it would feel. He stopped talking and waited. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I realized he was waiting for me to explain, to fix it, to step in and make the problem disappear the way I always had. Instead, I told him the truth. I said I stopped paying. I did not raise my voice. I did not soften it. I did not add an explanation or an apology. I stopped paying. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. Then nothing. No yelling, no accusations, just stunned quiet. After a few seconds, he asked what he was supposed to do. That question hit me harder than anything he could have said. Not because it was cruel, but because it was so revealing. He was not asking what went wrong. He was asking who would fix it now. I told him the claim would not be covered. I told him he would have to pay out of pocket. I told him the insurance company was not obligated to help because the policy was inactive. My voice sounded calm, professional, the way it did when I explained things to clients at work. I hated that I had learned to speak to my own father that way. He muttered something under his breath. I could hear papers rustling, drawers opening and closing. Mom's voice floated faintly in the background, asking what was wrong. Dad told me the repair estimate was high, not catastrophic, but enough to sting, enough to matter. He said he did not have that kind of money set aside. I did not respond right away. In that pause, something shifted between us. The illusion cracked. He was no longer the man who stood in the garage handing over car keys with a smile. He was a man facing a bill he could not easily pay. He asked me if I could help. The words hung there, heavy and familiar. For years, I would have said yes without thinking. I would have told myself it was temporary, that it was just this once. That family comes first. This time, I did not say yes. I told him I could not. He went quiet again. Then his voice tightened. He said, "You have the money." He said, "You know how hard things are right now." He said, "This is not the time to make a point." I felt something rise in me. Not anger, but clarity. I told him this was exactly the time to make a point. I told him he needed to handle his own responsibilities now. I told him I was not stepping back into that role. Mom took the phone from him then. Her voice was strained, brittle around the edges. She said they were dipping into the savings. She said Dad had been setting it aside for years. She said they would manage, but she said it like a question, not a statement. I said, "Okay." That seemed to surprise her. She had expected resistance or reassurance, not neutrality. The call ended awkwardly, without resolution. I set my phone down and stared at my computer screen, the open document in front of me completely forgotten. That night, I lay awake thinking about Dad's savings, the way he had always talked about it with pride, the way he treated it like proof that he was responsible, now that money was being used to patch a hole that never should have existed. Over the next few days, the reality of it settled in for them. Bills did not stop arriving just because I was gone. Accounts did not magically fix themselves. Companies did not care about intentions or feelings. They cared about payments. The savings began to shrink, quietly at first, then noticeably. Mom stopped calling daily. Lydia stopped texting altogether. When Dad did reach out again, his tone had changed. He did not accuse me. He did not lecture. He asked questions. How do you set up an online account? How do you reset a password? How do you talk to the utility company? Each question was a small admission that he had never known how any of it worked. I answered some of them, briefly, factually. I did not take over. I did not log in for him. I did not manage anything. I let him struggle. That was harder than it sounds. There were moments when my fingers itched to fix things, when my chest tightened with the urge to step in and smooth everything over. Old habits do not die quietly, but every time I felt myself slipping, I remembered the table, the socks, the words, "take it or get out." The accident was small. No one was hurt. The car was repaired, eventually. The money came out of savings instead of my account. And in that shift, David learned something he had never been forced to learn before. Nothing had been fine. It had just been funded. The day he called to tell me the repair was done, his voice was subdued, tired. He did not thank me. He did not apologize. He said, "We did not realize how much you were doing." That was it. No emotion wrapped around it, just a statement, like he was reading it off a receipt. But for the first time, it was true. I hung up the phone and sat there in the quiet of my apartment, letting the words sink in. It was not closed. It was not redemption, but it was the beginning of something they could not undo, and it was only the first domino. Chapter 6. And it was only the first domino. 2 months can change the temperature of a family in ways you do not notice until you step into the room again. In early January, their calls were still loud with blame. By late February, the messages sounded different. Not kinder, just tired, like everyone had been awake for too many nights staring at bills they did not understand. I did not go back to Naperville. I did not show up for Sunday dinners or quick drop-ins or any of the little rituals my mom used to use like glue. I stayed in my apartment and lived my days like a person who belonged to herself. Work, groceries, laundry, quiet evenings, the kind of life that sounds boring until you have spent years living in a constant state of emergency. Lydia stayed quiet for most of those weeks. That was new. Lydia loved attention. Lydia loved the spotlight. But when the spotlight turned from shiny to harsh, she vanished into her room like a cat under a bed. Then, one afternoon, while I was standing in the checkout line at the grocery store with a basket full of ordinary things, my phone rang. It was Lydia. I almost did not answer. My thumb hovered over the screen, and for a second, I could feel that old reflex in my body. The instinct to brace, the instinct to prepare for a tantrum or an accusation. But something about the timing felt different. People do not call from the middle of a panic unless the panic is already happening. I answered. At first, all I heard was noise, wind, a distant engine, a voice not quite forming words. Then Lydia said my name, and it did not sound like the Lydia I knew. It sounded small, like she had been squeezed. She said she needed Dad. She said she could not reach him. She said something was happening. I asked her where she was. She told me she was on a road near a shopping center, not far from home. She said she had pulled into a lot because a police car had lit up behind her. A police car, I repeated, because my mind did not want to process it. Lydia's breath hitched. She said she had not been speeding. She said she did not know what she did. She said the officer told her to turn off the engine and stay inside the car. I asked if she was okay. She said yes, but she sounded like she did not believe it. In the background, I heard a voice, muffled through the phone, a man asking for registration and insurance. Lydia's voice rose with that familiar edge, the one that always came out when she felt embarrassed. She said she could not find the paperwork. She said it should be in the glove compartment. She said Dad handled all of that. Dad handled all of that. I closed my eyes. She said the officer was standing by her window, and she could see people looking. Cars passing. A woman pushing a cart toward her own trunk slowly, watching too long. Like this was entertainment. Lydia said she did not want people to see her like this. I asked her what else was happening. She hesitated. Then she said there was a tow truck. A tow truck, I said, because my brain still wanted this to be something else. Lydia's voice cracked. She said it was not just a tow truck. She said it looked official. She said it was backing up behind the BMW, and the man driving it was getting out, like he had done this 1,000 times. My heart started beating harder. I gripped the handle of my grocery cart, knuckles whitening, as if that could keep the story from moving forward. Lydia said she told the officer it was her car. She said she showed her license. She said she begged him to tell the tow driver to stop. She said the officer looked at something on his handheld device, then looked back at her with a face that did not change. Then Lydia said the words that made everything click into place. She said the officer told her the vehicle was being repossessed. The grocery store around me kept moving. A cashier scanned items. Someone laughed near the floral section. The overhead music played a cheerful song that made my stomach turn. The normal world did not pause for other people's consequences. Lydia started crying. Loud, ugly crying. She said this could not be happening. She said Dad bought it for her. She said it was brand new. She said people were staring. I asked her if Dad knew. She said she had called him over and over. She said Mom was not picking up either. She said she did not know what to do. In the background, the tow driver's metal hooks clanked. I could hear it through Lydia's phone, sharp and cold, like the sound of a door slamming shut. The officer said something again, his voice calm, businesslike. Lydia repeated it to me in pieces. He was telling her she needed to remove her personal belongings. He was telling her the company had a legal right to take the vehicle. He was telling her he was there to keep things from escalating. Keep things from escalating. Like the BMW was not the escalation. Like the whole situation was not already burning. Lydia's voice turned frantic. She said she did not understand. She said Dad promised it was paid for. She said it was a graduation gift. She said he said not to worry about payments. I swallowed hard. That part was not surprising. David had always been confident when he handed someone a dream. The problem was, he had never been confident about the details after the dream arrived. Lydia said she wanted to call the tow company and tell them it was a mistake. She said she wanted to call the bank. She said she wanted to call someone who could fix it. I asked her if she had any paperwork in the car. She said no. She said Dad kept everything. Of course he did. The cashier at my line asked if I was paying with card or cash. I blinked, realized it was my turn, and handed over my card, with a hand that felt disconnected from my body. I paid, collected my bags, and walked out to the parking lot, my phone pressed to my ear, my heart thudding. Outside, the air bit my face. I set the grocery bags in my trunk and leaned against the car for balance. Lydia was still crying. She said she could not believe this. She said it was humiliating. She said everyone could see her. She said she felt like she was shrinking inside her own skin. Then she said the sentence that told me everything about how she had been living. She said she only wanted a car like her friends. Not a safe car, not a reliable car. A car like her friends. I pictured her in that BMW, smiling for photos, posting it online, letting people congratulate her like she had earned something. I pictured Dad in the garage at Christmas, proud of himself, proud of her, proud of the image. I pictured Mom laughing like the whole thing was a sweet story. And I pictured the quiet months after I left, the repairs Dad paid out of pocket, the savings draining, the bills stacking. Something had to give. Now it was given to the public. Lydia said the tow driver was telling her to step back. She said the car was already hooked. She said she could hear the winch whining, pulling the BMW into position like a captured animal. She said the officer told her to sign something acknowledging her belongings were removed. She said her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. I asked her again if she was safe. She said yes, but her voice shook. She said she felt like she was going to throw up. I told her to take her purse, her phone charger, anything personal. I told her to breathe. I told her to get home safely. She snapped at me then, and the Lydia I knew flared up through the tears. She said, "How am I supposed to get home?" She said, "The car is my way home." She said, "This is your fault." There it was, the old reflex. Blame the nearest person who used to fix things. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not remind her that Dad told me to get out. I did not remind her about the sock. I did not remind her about the years of me paying for systems she never even noticed. I just listened. In the distance behind her, I heard the tow truck engine rev. The sound grew louder, then started moving away. Lydia made a choking noise, like she had just watched something die. She said it was gone. Her voice was flat now, hollowed out. She said the bow was not on it anymore. She said it looked like any other car when it was being dragged away, like it was never special to begin with. She said people were still staring. I asked her again if Dad had called back. She said no. She said Mom was not answering. She said she felt stranded. For a brief moment, something tender moved in me. Not pity exactly, but a recognition. Lydia had been raised to believe the world would catch her before she fell. She had never been taught how to land. I told her to call a rideshare. I told her to go home. I told her to tell Dad what happened when she got there. Lydia started crying again, but softer this time, like she was running out of energy. She asked me what Dad was going to do. The question landed heavy. What was Dad going to do? That was what my family always asked when something went wrong. Not what we are going to do, not what can we change. What is Dad going to do? And for the first time, I did not have an answer. I said I did not know. Lydia went quiet. Then she said something small, almost like she was talking to herself. She said Dad was going to be so mad. Mad, not ashamed. Mad, not worried. Mad. I imagined Dad hearing the news. The way his face would tighten, the way his voice would sharpen, the way he would search for a way to make it someone else's fault. The tow truck had done its job. The officer had done his job. The lender had done its job. Reality had done its job. David was going to be left with only one thing: consequences. Lydia hung up soon after, saying she had to get out of the lot, that people were still watching, that she could not stand there anymore. Her voice sounded like she had aged 10 years in one afternoon. When the call ended, I stayed leaning against my car for a long time, staring at the rows of parked vehicles and shopping carts and people walking in and out of the store like nothing had happened. I thought about the Christmas garage, the applause, the pride. I thought about the price tag on my socks. I thought about Dad's steady voice telling me to take it or get out. And now I pictured Lydia on the side of the road, watching a tow truck pull away with her dream. The golden child, humbled in full daylight. I did not feel joy. I felt something quieter and harder, like a truth settling into place. Their world had been built on a foundation that depended on me staying silent and paying without question. The moment I stopped, the cracks did not appear. I climbed into my car, turned the key, and drove home with my groceries in the back seat, the heater warming my hands, my mind too clear for comfort. By the time I pulled into my parking spot and carried the bags upstairs, I also knew I was not going to stop them. The calls came anyway, not all at once, not in a rush like before. They came in waves, spaced out by days of heavy silence, the kind of silence that grows thick with dread. I heard about them the way you hear about a storm after it has already torn through town. Pieces of information scattered, incomplete, passed along by voices that sounded worn down. The first message came from Mom. Not a call. A few days later, Lydia sent a photo. Just one. An envelope on the kitchen table with the county seal printed in the corner. The return address alone told the story. Property tax office. I stared at the image longer than I expected to. For years, escrow had quietly handled everything. Taxes paid on time. No drama. No notices taped to doors. It was one of those invisible systems people forget exists until it stops working. Now it has stopped. More letters followed. Not sent to me, but photographed and forwarded. like evidence in a trial no one wanted to attend. Statements explaining that the previous payments no longer covered the balance. Warnings about amounts past due. Each envelope looked heavier than the last. I could imagine them piling up on the kitchen counter in Naperville, pushed aside at first, then stacked, then stared at in disbelief. I could see Dad picking them up, flipping them over, searching for a mistake. I could see Mom sitting at the table with her hands folded, whispering prayers she had not said in years. And I could see Lydia watching all of it with wide eyes, finally understanding that the world did not run on promises. The argument started soon after. I did not hear them directly. I heard about them in fragments. Lydia complained that Mom kept crying. Mom says Dad never listens. David snapped that no one appreciates how hard he works. Everyone is talking. No one is taking responsibility. Lydia sent a voice message one night that I almost deleted without listening. Her voice sounded brittle, like glass stretched too thin. She said she did not know how bills worked. She said she thought money just came from Dad. She said she did not understand why everything was suddenly so complicated. That sentence stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. Money just came from Dad. Not from work, not from planning, not from sacrifice. It just came. I thought about all the times I had quietly shifted my own budget to make room for theirs. All the times I had told myself I would buy something later. All the times I had swallowed resentment and called it family. And Lydia had never seen any of it. The next time Dad called, it was late in the evening. The light in my apartment had gone soft, the kind that makes everything feel slower. I almost let it ring. But something in me wanted to hear his voice now. Not because I needed closure, but because I needed confirmation. He sounded older, not weak, not defeated, just tired in a way that came from losing control of a narrative you had told yourself for years. He did not yell, he did not accuse. He asked if I knew what an escrow shortage was. I said yes. He asked why the county was sending notices. I said, because the payments were no longer being made. He went quiet for a long moment. Then he said he thought everything would sort itself out. Those words landed heavy. Sort itself out. That had been his plan. Not a strategy, not a budget, a belief. He admitted then what Lydia had only suspected. He said he bought the BMW quietly. He said he did not tell Mom at first. He said he did not think it would be a problem. He said Lydia had been talking for months about how her friends all had new cars. He said she worked hard. He said it was a graduation gift. He said he wanted to do something special. He said he assumed things would stay fine. I leaned back against my couch and closed my eyes. He had not asked if he could afford it. He had not run numbers. He had not looked at the long-term impact. He had looked at his daughter and his pride and the moment, and he had counted on me without ever saying my name. He said he thought if something came up, we would figure it out. He said the family always figures it out. I told him the family figuring it out had meant me figuring it out. Alone, he did not argue. That silence told me more than any apology could have. The letters kept coming. Final notices, past due amounts, explanations printed in cold language that did not care about intentions or love or pride. Just balances, deadlines, consequences. Lydia stopped sending photos after a while. I think she stopped opening the mail. Mom started calling my aunt more. I heard that through a cousin who called to check on me, her voice cautious, like she was stepping into a room with broken glass on the floor. She asked if things were really that bad. I said yes. She asked if I was helping. I said no. There was a pause. Then she said she understood, but she did not sound sure. I did not explain myself. I had learned by then that explanations were invitations to argue. Inside the house, the dynamic shifted in ways I could feel from miles away. Dad was no longer the steady center. He was reacting now, not leading. Mom hovered between panic and denial. Lydia oscillated between anger and fear, and I was no longer the invisible support beam holding everything upright. One evening, Dad called again. This time, his voice was flat. He said he had gone to the bank. He said he sat across from a man younger than him, who spoke in careful tones. He said they laid out the numbers. He said the margin for error was gone. He said he did not recognize the situation he was in. That sentence hurt more than I expected. He said he always thought he was in control. He said he thought responsibility meant good intentions and hard work. He said he did not realize how much he had handed off. I said nothing. I let him talk. He said he did not know how to fix it. That was the moment I had been waiting for without realizing it. Not the collapse, not the drama, the admission. Dad did not know how to fix it, and I did not step in. I did not tell him what to do. I did not offer to make a call. I did not suggest a plan. I did not remind him that I could handle it if he just let me. I listened, and when he finished, I told him I hoped he found a way. The line went quiet. I imagined him standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, staring at the same counter where I had once placed a folder under the Christmas tree. I imagined him realizing that the safety net was gone, not because I was cruel, but because he had never acknowledged it existed. After that call, the silence stretched longer. Days passed without messages, then weeks. The letters did not stop. The problems did not magically resolve, but something else changed. The blame quieted. There were fewer accusations, fewer frantic demands, fewer attempts to pull me back into the center of their chaos. They were too busy dealing with the consequences to focus on controlling the narrative. I sat in my apartment one night, folding laundry, listening to the soft hum of the dryer through the wall, and felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the family I thought I had. Relief that I no longer had to pretend. Dad had lost control. Not in a dramatic explosion, but in a slow unraveling of assumptions. He could not command his way out of math. He could not charm his way past deadlines. He could not hand someone else a dream and expect it to stay upright forever. And for the first time in my life, that loss of control did not pull me back in. It pushed me further out. I went to bed that night knowing that whatever came next would not be solved by me. And that felt like both an ending and a beginning. Something shifted after that. Not inside the house in Naperville, but outside of it. In the wider circle my family had always cared about more than they admitted. The circle of relatives, church friends, neighbors, people who smiled politely at holidays and quietly kept score. At first, I did not hear about it at all. My phone stayed mostly quiet. No late-night calls, no long texts filled with accusation or guilt, just silence. And then, slowly, the silence broke in a different way. A cousin I had not spoken to in months called one afternoon. Her voice was hesitant, careful. She said she wanted to check on me. She said she heard things were tense. I asked what she had heard. She paused, then said people were confused. She said everyone thought I was the one being dramatic at Christmas. She said that was the story that went around at first, that I had overreacted, that I was jealous, that I walked out over a pair of socks. I let her finish. Then she said something changed. She said people started asking questions. She said someone at a family gathering asked Dad how Lydia liked her new car. She said Dad got quiet. She said Mom jumped in and changed the subject. She said the room noticed. Another relative asked later why Lydia was riding with Mom everywhere. Someone else joked about gas prices and said at least Lydia had a BMW to worry about it in. Lydia apparently left the room. The questions did not stop. Where is the car? Why is Lydia borrowing rides? Did you sell it already? One could picture it. The polite smiles, the casual tone, the way people probe without sounding like they are probing. My cousin said eventually someone asked outright. She said it was not rude, just curious. She said Dad looked like he had swallowed something sour. The story did not come out cleanly. It never does. Pieces were shared, details softened, responsibility blurred. But the truth has a way of surfacing, even when people try to bury it under explanations. The car had been taken. Repossession is a word that lands heavy in a room like that. It carries judgment, whether anyone means it to or not. After that, the tone changed. I heard from an aunt who had not called me in years. She left a voicemail that started with, "I just wanted to check on you." She said families can be complicated. She said sometimes people expect too much without realizing it. That was new. Another cousin messaged me late one night. She said she heard you were paying a lot of the bills before. She said I did not know that. She said that is a lot for one person. a lot. That was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged the weight I had been carrying without immediately minimizing it. Meanwhile, the questions did not stop for Dad and Mom. People asked about the house, about work, about why Dad looked so tired lately, about why Mom stopped hosting Sunday dinners. Small things, observations, the kind that adds up. Lydia felt it the most. She stopped posting online entirely. No photos, no updates, no vague captions about gratitude or growth. She stopped going out with friends as often. When she did, she borrowed Mom's car or caught a ride. People noticed. Someone asked her directly where her BMW was. I heard about that from her, weeks later, in a voice message that sounded more defeated than angry. She said she did not know what to say. She said she felt stupid. She said everyone remembered how excited she had been, how she had cried in the garage, how she had talked about road trips and leather seats. She said now there was nothing to show for it. I did not respond. Not because I did not care, but because I had learned that explaining myself never changed how people saw things. Silence did. Dad tried to get ahead of it at first. He called a few relatives. He framed it as bad timing, a misunderstanding, a rough patch. He said things would be back on track soon, but the facts did not support the story. The house was quieter. The routines changed. The confidence that used to radiate from him was gone. People could feel it, even if they could not name it. Mom stopped calling people as much. She stopped correcting the narrative. I think she was tired of trying to hold it together in public when it was falling apart in private. And I stayed out of it. When people did reach out to me, I did not tell my side of the story in full. I did not list numbers. I did not describe late nights and spreadsheets and years of responsibility. I said one sentence. I stopped paying. No bitterness, no drama, just a fact. Some people went quiet after that. Some said, I understand. Some did not say anything at all. But no one called me selfish anymore. That word disappeared from conversations, the way it does when it no longer fits the facts. I noticed the change in myself, too. The way my shoulders no longer tensed when my phone rang. The way I did not feel the need to defend my choices to people who had never lived inside my life. The silence I had chosen was doing more work than any explanation ever could. One afternoon, I ran into an old family friend at the grocery store. She smiled politely, then looked at me more closely, like she was seeing me for the first time in years. She said, "You look lighter." I laughed softly, surprised by the honesty of it. I said, "I feel lighter." She nodded, like that made sense. Like she had seen this story before. Maybe lived it herself. No one asked me to fix anything anymore. No one hinted that I should step in for the sake of peace. No one reminded me that family comes first. The unspoken understanding had shifted. People saw that what had happened was not a tantrum. It was a boundary. Dad stopped calling me to ask for advice. When he did call, it was brief. Neutral. Sometimes awkward. The authority was gone from his voice. In its place was caution. Mom's messages softened. Less accusation. More updates. She told me when Lydia started working more hours. She told me when Dad spent an entire weekend sorting paperwork instead of watching television. She told me things like she was reporting the weather. Lydia stayed mostly silent. When she did reach out, it was not to brag or complain. It was to ask simple questions about adulthood that she had never needed to ask before. How do you budget groceries? How do you know what you can afford? Those questions used to feel like burdens. Now they felt like signs of something changing, even if slowly. I answered some of them, not all. I chose carefully what I gave and what I kept, and I did not step back into the role of protector or provider. I let my absence do the talking. There is a particular power in silence when it is chosen and not imposed, when it is not avoidance but clarity. I felt it in my own body, in the way my breath came easier. In this way, my thoughts no longer raced ahead to anticipate disaster. For years, my family had spoken loudly about loyalty and sacrifice and family first. They had never examined who was paying for those values. Now they were being examined by others, quietly, casually, in passing comments and raised eyebrows. And I did nothing to accelerate it. I lived my life. Work, friends, evenings that ended without anxiety, mornings that began without dread. The silence around my name changed tone. It was no longer sharp or judgmental. It was thoughtful, curious, sometimes respectful. I did not need vindication. I did not need apologies. I needed space. And I had it. As the weeks passed, I realized something that surprised me. The story was no longer mine to tell or defend. It belonged to them now. And the quiet I kept was answering every question they could not. Life without being the safety net did not arrive all at once. It came in small moments that felt almost boring at first. The absence of crisis was so unfamiliar that my body did not trust it. I would wake up some mornings with my heart already racing, bracing for a problem that never came. Then I would realize nothing was wrong. I went to work. I answered emails. I sat through meetings without half my attention drifting toward my phone. The constant background noise of responsibility that had followed me for years slowly faded, like a ringing in the ears that you do not notice until it stops. My boss, Caleb, noticed the change before I did. One afternoon, he asked me to stay after a meeting. His tone was casual, but his eyes were focused in a way that told me this was not small talk. He said he had been watching my work closely. He said I seemed more present lately, more decisive. He said he trusted me with something bigger. I felt a flicker of surprise, followed by something warmer. Pride, maybe. Or relief. For years, I had been competent, reliable, the one people leaned on. But I was also tired, distracted, split in half between my own life and the invisible labor waiting for me at HAP, home. Now there was space. Caleb started looping me into conversations I had never been part of before. Budget planning, long-term strategy, decisions that required clear thinking and follow-through. I did not hesitate the way I used to. I did not second-guess myself. I realized I had been operating on survival mode for so long that I forgot what it felt like to build instead of patch. My finances changed too, not because I suddenly had more money, but because the money I earned finally stayed where it belonged. I paid my bills on time without stress. I set aside savings without resentment. I bought groceries without calculating how much was left for someone else. It was not a luxury. It was stable. I cooked more. Simple meals, nothing impressive, but I ate at my table instead of standing at the counter scrolling through messages. I slept better, deeper, without dreams of ringing phones or overdue notices. There were moments when the quiet felt too quiet. I would see something small that reminded me of my family, a commercial for a holiday sale, a house with lights on in every window, a car like the one Lydia used to drive. Those moments came with a tug in my chest. Not regret exactly, more like mourning. I miss them sometimes. Or maybe I missed the idea of them. The version of family I had spent years trying to earn my way into. I let myself feel that sadness without acting on it. There were days when guilt crept in, uninvited. It would whisper that I had abandoned them, that I had chosen peace over loyalty, that I should check in more, do more, be more. On those days, I reminded myself of the table, of the socks, of the words that told me exactly where I stood. Take it or get out. I had gotten out. And I was still standing. The strangest part was realizing how much energy I had spent waiting for something to go wrong. Even weeks after the chaos had settled, I would catch myself scanning for danger, checking my phone reflexively, mentally rehearsing responses to emergencies that never came. One evening, as I sat on my couch reading, it hit me suddenly. I was not waiting for a crisis. The thought stopped me cold. I closed the book and stared at the wall, letting the realization sink in. For most of my adult life, I had lived in a state of anticipation, always ready to step in, always braced for impact. That tension had shaped everything. My choices, my relationships, my sense of self. Without it, I felt lighter, and also unsure, like someone learning how to walk without armor. Caleb checked in with me again a few weeks later. He asked how I was doing. Really, not in the polite way people ask when they expect a polite answer. He said I seemed different, in a good way. I told him the truth, without details. I said some personal responsibilities had shifted. I said I finally had room to focus. He nodded like he understood more than I said. People who have lived a little usually do. At home, my routines became anchors. Morning coffee by the window, a walk after dinner, Music played softly while I cleaned. Small acts of care that I had never had the bandwidth for before. I stopped explaining myself to people who did not need an explanation. When family news reached me, it came indirectly. A message from Mom about Lydia working more hours. A brief update from Dad about sorting paperwork. Neutral information, shared without expectation. I responded when it felt right. Briefly, kindly, without offering solutions. I noticed that my responses were no longer followed by requests. The dynamic had changed. I was no longer the solution. That truth settled in slowly, like dust after a long drive on a gravel road. There were nights when I thought about the younger version of myself, the one who believed love was something you proved through endurance, the one who thought being needed was the same as being valued. I wished I could tell her it was not, but maybe she needed to learn it the hard way. The way I did. One Saturday morning, I woke up late and lay in bed listening to the rain against the window. No agenda, no urgency. Just time stretching in front of me like an open road. I smiled at the ceiling, a small, private smile, and felt something shift again. I was not holding my breath. That might sound insignificant, but to me it felt monumental. I got up, made coffee, and let the day unfold without forcing it into usefulness. I ran errands. I answered a few emails. I met a friend for lunch and laughed without checking my phone every 5 minutes. On the drive home, stopped at a red light. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired but not worn down, focused but not tense. I looked like myself. The guilt did not disappear completely. It probably never will. Love leaves marks, even when you draw boundaries. But the guilt no longer ran my life. I had learned something I did not know I needed to learn. That stepping back did not mean I was heartless. It meant I was honest. That peace was not something you waited to be given. It was something you chose, even when it disappointed people who benefited from your sacrifice. I turned onto my street and parked my car, the same one I had driven away from Naperville months earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. And also like yesterday. As I walked up the stairs to my apartment, keys in hand, I felt steady, grounded. I was not living in reaction anymore. I was living forward. And I knew, deep down, that whatever came next, I would meet it without abandoning myself again. The conversation happened months later, not in a dramatic showdown, not around a holiday table, not with witnesses. It happened on an ordinary afternoon when the air felt neutral and nothing was on fire. Dad called and asked if we could talk. Not demanded. I asked. I told him yes. We met at a small diner halfway between my apartment and the house in Naperville, the kind of place with vinyl booths and refilled coffee cups and a low hum of conversation that made privacy possible without isolation. Mom was already there when I arrived. She stood up when she saw me, hesitated, then sat back down. Her smile was careful, practiced. Dad rose more slowly. He looked thinner than I remembered, older in a way that had nothing to do with time. We ordered food we barely touched. For a while, no one knew how to begin. We talked about neutral things, weather, traffic, a neighbor who had moved. It was awkward, but it was honestly awkward, not the kind where everyone pretends nothing is wrong. Finally, Dad cleared his throat and looked at his hands. He said he wanted to explain something. I waited. He said he bought the car because he wanted Lydia to feel special. He said she had talked about it for a long time. He said her friends all seemed to have things he never had growing up, and he wanted to give her something he could not give himself back then. He said it felt like the right thing at the moment. He admitted he did not think it through. He admitted he assumed everything would stay the same. He admitted he never asked me how much I was covering or how close things were. To the edge. He said he thought being a good father meant saying yes. The words landed quietly between us. Mom spoke next. She said she laughed that night because she did not know what else to do. She said she saw the socks and felt uncomfortable, but did not want to contradict Dad in front of everyone. She said she told herself it was just a joke. She did not say sorry. Not directly, but her voice softened when she said she wished she had handled it differently. I listened. That was something I had learned how to do without preparing a defense. David went on. He said when the payments stopped, he panicked. He said he felt embarrassed and angry and scared. He said he took it out on everyone else because he did not know how to face the truth. He said the truth was that he had been relying on me without ever acknowledging it. I let that sit. He said losing the car had been a wake-up call, not just for Lydia, but for him. He said watching the tow truck pull away was one of the worst moments of his life. Not because of the car, but because he realized how fragile everything had been. He said he did not want to live like that anymore. Mom added that Lydia had changed. She said Lydia was working more hours now. She said she complained less. She said she asked questions instead of assuming. She said it was not easy, but it was real. I looked at Dad and asked him one thing. I asked him if he would do it differently now. He did not answer right away. Then he said yes. He said he would have had the conversation. He said he would have looked at the numbers. He said he would have asked me instead of assuming. He said he would not have told me to take it or get out. That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get. I nodded. I told them I was not coming back to the way things were. I told them I was not going to manage their finances or smooth over conflicts. I told them I would show up as a daughter, not as a safety net. They did not argue. Dad said he understood, even if it took him too long to get there. We finished our coffee. We stood up. Mom hugged me, briefly, like she was afraid to hold on too long. Dad put his hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. It was not a reset. It was a truce. Life did not turn into a tidy ending after that. We did not become a picture-perfect family. We did not erase the past, but the lies stopped. Lydia no longer floated through life, assuming someone else would catch her. David no longer pretended everything was fine when it was not. Mom stopped laughing things off that needed to be faced, and I stopped shrinking to make room for everyone else. Family comes first means something different to me now. It does not mean sacrificing yourself until there is nothing left. It does not mean staying quiet to keep the peace. It does not mean being the most responsible person in the room while everyone else enjoys the benefits. To me, family comes first means honesty. It means boundaries. It means refusing to fund disrespect. It means choosing integrity over approval. Walking away was not revenge in the way people expect revenge to look. There was no yelling, no public exposure, no dramatic confrontation. There was silence. There was truth. There were consequences that arrived on their own timeline. That was enough. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this. Silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.